I grew up in Texas. I still live here along with my family that we mentioned in this story. When the '07 recession hit, my father lost his job. It was a management job that paid well. We lived in a comfortable but slightly country area outside of Lockhart, Texas. With our income at a halt, we lost our home and had to move. My parents found a trailer park with a 2-bedroom for rent. A little cramped for our family of 5, but we had no other choice. The man we rented from was crooked for other reasons, but he's not the disturbed landlord this story revolves around. We lived in that trailer for a few years before needing to move out from reasons I was too young to remember. I was 11 years old when my parents began house hunting again. Down the road from the trailer park was a cul-de-sac of land. There is a business in the center of this land called the Why Not Party House. That was a bar or a wannabe club, I suppose. Considering I was a child, I never entered the building. There were a few houses and trailers scattered around different parts in this secluded circle. A worn-looking trailer was for rent. The man renting it, Mr. Dahl, was an elderly man who couldn't have been younger than 65 or so. A few things to note about this trailer. It had old stone steps leading up to the front door. There was a bunk bed in one of the bedrooms and a somewhat functioning air hockey table. The master bedroom had a queen-sized bed, and there was carpet in the kitchen, which I always found odd. The back door was nailed shut and completely unusable. If that wasn't enough to make you say nope, then let me also say it had a mice problem. My family is working class and my mother is disabled, and with my father out of work, we only relied on her disability check. We had no choice but to rent out this trailer or be homeless. The entire deal was strange and honestly sad that this was the position we were in. But my parents had rented out this trailer on the agreement of words only. There was no official lease that was signed or any sort of legal document that proved we were renting from this man. Before we moved into the trailer, Mr. Dahl took it upon himself to build a new deck for us to replace the old steps. He even built a little picnic table for us to sit outside. As a child, it completely blew my mind a stranger could be so kind to craft these things without being asked or wanting money. It seemed like an act of pure kindness. A bad person wouldn't do that sort of thing, right? The first few weeks of renting from him went by without a hitch. The master bedroom had no light bulbs, and we weren't there long enough to change them, so my family and I all slept in the living room. Something about the bedroom with the bunk beds seemed scary to me. I'm unsure how my brothers felt, but they never slept in there either. As I mentioned previously, we relied on my mother's disability. Sometimes we were late on rent and had to pay late fees, but other than that, Mr. Dahl would be very understanding about everything despite being a little irritated. My mother's check hit every first of the month, which is also the month for bills. Her, my father, and my older brother got into the car and drove into the city to take care of bills and get a money order for rent, and I was left with my oldest brother. It was a time when we had no internet or cable, just VHS movies. Maya was in the hallway. Come to find out, the trailer was flipped and the front door was the one nailed shut. Playing my Wii, A Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess to be exact. Something I need you all to note. We had no keys to this trailer. The only person with a set of keys was Mr. Dahl, so we were unable to ever lock the trailer when we left. As I was playing my game, right in front of the door that was locked, I saw the knob turn. No knocking. The knob jiggled and our landlord had tried to pry the door open twice but wasn't able to do so successfully. I just froze and realized that it was him, and he must have assumed that no one was home because the car was gone. But the door was locked and I thought it was fine to continue playing my game. An 11-year-old brain. My brother was in the living room and we both heard this noise. At first I thought it was a dog barking, and my brother had heard it too. But the longer we listened, we realized it was an animal, but the sound of people yelling. My brother went to the front door to investigate the noise, and me being a scared child, I followed right behind him. Both of my parents were standing out in the yard. My mother was shouting at her landlord, who was sitting on a farming vehicle. I'm not sure what the name of it was. I remember it had a very long piece attached to it, and she was visibly angry and her voice was laced with rage. My father was yelling at him too, but I don't remember anything that was said exactly. My oldest brother asked what had happened, and here's how it goes. My parents pulled up to our trailer with the money order for rent. When they did, they called Mr. Dahl backing up the farming vehicle against the door, the only exit in that trailer. My mother went into full protection mode knowing her 2 children were stuck inside. She confronted him immediately. Luckily, he backed away from the door, but he was still operating this farm vehicle. I believe that she threatened him. They had an exchange of words and he whipped the vehicle around fast and aggressively close to my mother, that he almost hit her with it. My parents were bewildered about what they had just witnessed. They didn't know what to do, so they called the police. When the police showed up and my parents explained the situation, it was no use because we had no legal agreement of renting out the trailer. The officer shrugged it off and said there was nothing that they could do about it, or anything because no one was injured. Apparently, trapping 2 children inside a trailer that's a fire hazard isn't illegal. We only spent one last night in that trailer. We no longer felt safe there. We packed up as many things in our car as we could, but unfortunately didn't have the money to rent a moving truck for the rest of our furniture. We stored the belongings we took with us to my grandparents' house, and we rented a motel room. It was about a week later after this happened when we tried going back for the rest of our belongings. We wanted no confrontation with Mr. Dahl, so we showed up to the trailer at night. It was dark inside and the porch light was off. My father and oldest brother went inside the trailer casually. Me and my mother and my older brother were waiting out in the car. It was no less than 5 minutes when my father and oldest brother ran out of the trailer, with speed I had never seen before. They hopped in the car and pulled out of there like some scene in an action movie, while my mom was terrified and demanding answers. Apparently, they went into the master bedroom first, which was an immediate right when you walked inside. They were going to grab a box of paperwork that we had to leave behind when we left. They noticed something lying in the bed, not just lying there asleep but completely naked. It was Mr. Dahl, and right beside him was a gun. We never went back to that trailer. We never recovered the rest of our furniture that had sentimental value with family members living and deceased. It's been almost a decade since this has happened. My mother and I discuss it every now and then, but we're thankful that time is behind us. I can't help but wonder if all that abandoned furniture was the result of some other unfortunate family who had to leave everything behind, or had it taken from them forcefully. This story still gives me chills, and I haven't spoken of it in a while. This is a long story and needs extensive backstory, so please bear with me. Flashback to high school. I wasn't the most social guy in school. I had my really close friends, but other than that, I would classify myself as a loner. I had really bad acne, which affected me a lot when meeting new people, and I was very addicted to World of Warcraft. So, it was a Friday night, a classic raid night in Vanilla WoW. About 2 hours before the raid, my best friend that I grew up with, let's call him T, called me. He was like, "Yo bro, I'm meeting up with 2 women later tonight. Let's drink and hang out with them." It was one of those classic fork in the road moments. Be a nerd and blow another Friday night playing a video game, or go out with my best friend and see if I can finally lose my virginity. Before I get to the next part of the story, I need to give some backstory on T. T was nothing short of a boss, and I truly looked up to him. He was a really good-looking guy and was extremely intelligent. I am not understating this. He's the type of guy when he walks into a room, all the women just gravitate to him. But T has a dark side. Even though he has everything going on for him, it was never good enough. He got expelled from the school that we both went to for having a couple grams of weed. just trying to flex, and he really got caught by a teacher. So he was sent to another school about 30 minutes away from me. Nothing changed, and it actually got far, far worse. He became the guy. He started dating all the hot chicks and became a massive drug dealer. He supplied about 4 or 5 high schools and colleges in the area, and was for sure on the radar of the law and other rivals. Now back to the story. So, after playing mental ping pong for about 30 minutes, weighing all my options, potentially get laid, drunk, or nerded up like usual, I finally said screw it. Count me in for tonight, T. I bribe my brother for $20 and he agrees to raid for me, and the night begins. T picks me up from my place and greets me with a big smile and says, "We're getting laid tonight, brother." I'm like, whatever bro, we'll see. I'm very used to T over-exaggerating. So I quickly ask, when are we meeting up with these women? It's about 9:30 at this point. Under his voice he says around 1 a.m. I'm like, what the heck are we supposed to do for 3.5 hours? T pulls out a bottle of Bacardi 151 with the metal grate and passes it to me. Thankfully, I had been drinking pretty hard that year, so my tolerance was decent. We head to this awesome park to burn time and start passing the bottle back and forth. We catch up on life, and we're about a 6 out of 10 drunk at this point. It's around 11:30. So with an hour and a half still to burn before we're supposed to meet with said woman, T says, "Hey, let's roll to Taco Bell. We can get some food and sober up." At this point, I'm drunk and we have some time to burn, so what the hell? Let's go to Taco Bell. As most degenerates know, Taco Bell is open late, and the one that we went to was located in a shopping center. No surprise around 12 a.m. There are no cars there whatsoever in the parking lot, except for the workers. T rolls up to buy his food and we just park outside Taco Bell while he eats. While T is eating, I snag a cigarette and get some fresh air. As I puff away on the cigarette, a white van rolls up with tinted windows and no license plate. The van parks to the west of our car about 50 feet away in this empty parking lot. The lights inside and outside of the van instantly turn off and no one gets out. I keep smoking and I don't think much of it. I mean, we're essentially doing the same thing, but a car with no license plate is obviously weird. I get back into T's car and I start getting a really uneasy feeling about this van. At this point, I've sobered up a little bit, and I just keep eyeing down this van. Something doesn't feel right. It chose to park 3/4 of the way into the parking lot, with a perfect view of our car. I turn to T and tell him that it's time to leave. This is where the backstory comes into play. As I mentioned, T was in very deep at this point and was at the height of his drug dealing career. So, that exact thought was in the back of my mind when this van was parked inconspicuously. This next part is not exaggerated in the slightest. T turns on his headlights to his car to leave, and I kid you not, almost instantly after our lights are on, the white van turns their lights on too. My stomach dropped to the floor. At this point, we're both freaking out. T knows that he could be busted by the police at any point, and that's not even considering all his rivals and people that he screwed over. So, right when we see the light turn on from the van, we turn ours off. And no joke, the van does the exact same thing and mimics our reaction. T reaches to the backseat of his car and pulls out a backpack with a weapon in it. I can't believe this is actually going down. At this point, I'm inching on crying. This is obviously no coincidence. We were followed to the shopping center. We sat paralyzed in fear and dripping in sweat for the next 10 minutes, waiting to see if the van would move. It didn't. T started mumbling to himself. This might be a goon squad that was hired to hunt me down. I'm speechless to that comment. I was a normal, unsocial kid who loved sports and video games, and now I'm in this terrible and possibly life-threatening situation. At this point, I really wish I would have just stayed home and played World of Warcraft. No potential sex is worth the heart attack I'm currently going through. I felt extremely nauseous and I am so close to throwing up. Is this actually happening or am I dreaming? This doesn't feel like the police. They wouldn't go through this type of charade. They would have turned off their lights and arrested us by now. I can't stand this demented showdown that we're currently in. I'm on the verge of a mental breakdown, and tears are rolling down my face. I turn to T and tell him to turn on his lights one more time. Almost like clockwork, the van flicks on their lights. But this time, it was very different. I was able to see multiple shadows of hooded men in the van. I turn to T and tell him to book it out of there. I've never seen someone go 0 to 60 out of a shopping center before, but you can bet your ass we did. T turns his head while exiting the shopping center and sees the van following us at a fast pace. We start cutting down side roads for the next 5 minutes. Thankfully, no one is following us anymore. At this point, I'm just staring at T and asking him, "What the heck was that?" T says with a weak voice, "I have no idea, other than what you know I do, drug dealing." We take a deep breath and we hit the bottle some more. The next 20 minutes we sat in silence and came to grips with almost being involved in a sting operation, robbed by rivals or even worse. Once our heart rates had dropped under 250 beats per minute, we finally headed out to meet the women. And T and I never spoke of it again. And to this day, the thought of that night still chills me to the core. I was at 9 or 10, and this was back in the early 90s when latchkey kids were fine and no one blinked an eye. I was home alone and decided to walk to my local Blockbuster, maybe a 30-minute there and back. I had done it before on my bike and wasn't worried or scared. I took off and got about halfway down my block when all the craziness had started. A side note, unbeknownst to me, my neighbor's son was a drunk or a drug addict, or something was wrong with him. My parents evidently knew but didn't tell me because he has moved out a while back, I guess. All of a sudden, here comes a cherry picker roaring down the street, going super fast. I remember because several other cars passed and this one made me jump and look up. There is a man shirtless in the top of the cherry picker hollering stuff like, "Oh yeah, woo!" and your basic drunken BS. I immediately felt uncomfortable, and before I could decide what I wanted to do, he saw me. He yelled something out at me and threw a beer bottle down. That freaked me out and I immediately decided this trip was over and that I was going back home. I turned around and started back towards my house, but nervously decided to start heading into people's yards to make it look like I was going into a different house. That didn't help at all. He was already heading toward me. The driver was now slapping his hand on the truck door, obviously drunk as well. They were yelling out to me with garbage like, "Hey little girl, where you going?" I ducked behind a house and saw a large pine tree between the two yards, so I jetted out and ducked behind it to see if they were still following me. To my absolute terror, the guy in the bucket goes, "I see you hiding behind that tree, little girl." At that point, I lost it. I ran as fast as I could in a sheer panic to my house, backyard, and I ran in locking it behind me. I ran and checked the other locks and went into my parents' master bathroom and crawled into the shower and put a towel over me. I was sobbing. I called my mom and dad, who told me to hang up and call 911. I did, and they asked me if I was hidden, which was so terrifying. Nothing happened after that. The cops arrived right after my parents had pulled in and acted like they had been home. I roll, but they're good people. The cops actually found the men and they were arrested and charged with my stuff, along with many other things they had evidently been up to that day. I wasn't the only one that they had harassed in our neighborhood, but I was the only child. And of course, it was our neighbor's drunken, disorderly son.